You know? Okay, so good evening po mga ka-YouTubers. Welcome again to another live streaming of tax training, no? And ito po ulit yung lingkod po ngayon. Our topic is about the selection of transfer pricing method. Ito po yung continuation ng ating topic last Thursday doon sa ating online streaming. So, this time, selection of transfer pricing methods kasi tapos na natin yung ibang topics noon. And before I start, I would like to say thank you sa atin pong mga YouTubers, lalo-lalo na sa ating mga subscribers na ilan na tayo ngayon? 4,830 na po yung mga subscribers natin. So, thank you very much, no? Sana hindi kayo magsasawa at saka sana tuloy-tuloy po ninyong tangkilikin. And we promise to bring you more tax updates po dito sa ating YouTube channel, Tax Training. Our aim here is for you to have a better tax compliance, no? So, I just want to share my sentiment, no? Doon sa yung kalalabas lang po namin na video, doon sa conviction po ni Ms. Claire de la Puente on 8 counts of criminal cases filed against her by the Bureau of Internal Revenue. Alam mo nyo, ang nararamdaman ko, nalulungkot ako para sa kanya. Kasi itong mga bagay na to naiiwasan sana to eh. Kaya nga ang title ko doon is yung documentation, yun, on the importance of documentation. Kasi kung may document ka, kaya yung ating tinuturo, yung sa free bookkeeping, na online bookkeeping na tayo ngayon, at meron tayo ulit, September 29 and 30. Talagang ini-emphasize po natin dyan that the heart of tax compliance is bookkeeping. Bakit po? Kasi tingnan mo, kung documented itong negosyo ni Ms. Claire de la Puente na sabi niya, kung basahin mo talaga, 245 pages po itong cases niya. Kung basahin mo talaga po ang sinasabi niya dyan na since ang negosyo is family corporation, parang nilagay lang siya na pinangalan lang sa kanya, but wala talaga siyang hand on the management. Alam niyo, sana naiwasan yun kung may proper documentation. Kasi kahit anong allegations po na gagawin niya sa korte, wala siyang mapapakitang dokumento. So anong mangyayari? Ang sinasabi lang niya, walang operation, but napakalakas ng ebidensya ng BIR, no? At saka ang LTO, may mga ebidensya sila na ang sabi niya walang operation yung mga bosses. 19 franchises and 237 bosses po ang nabigyan ng prangkisa. At may mga record na bumabiyahe, may mga violations, may mga tickets, no? May mga number ang bosses na napakabigat po ng allegations ni Ms. Claire de la Puente na hindi niya kaya ng bigyan ng documentation at ng katuturan kasi wala naman siya maipakita ng dokumento, no? At saka sa is-isi ang naka-record doon na treasurer siya. So sinong treasurer? Siya talagang may hawak ng pera, no? Sana naiwasan ito kung may proper documentation, may proper bookkeeping. At doon sa affidavit po mismo ng examiner, nagsasabi doon na walang mga books of accounts, walang mga records na pinakita sa kanila itong corporation na si Ms. Claire de la Puente ang palaging nagre-represent at saka siyang on record na treasurer, no? So sana naiwasan itong mga ganitong problema kung may proper documentation. Okay? So, balik po tayo sa ating topics ngayon. Continuation po ito ng ating transfer pricing audit, no? So, let's now go to the selection of transfer pricing method. But before that, I would like to shout out po doon sa ating mga YouTubers at saka yung palaging na nandyan at nakasubaybay po sa atin. No? Sino yung mga nandyan?
Ma'am, si Ma'am Mary Grace,
Okay.
Sir Josepino Relian.
Always, no? Si Ma'am Mary Grace, shout out po, Miss Mary Grace at saka si Mr.
Josepino Relien.
Josepino Relien, no?
Tas, ma'am,
Shout out.
shoutout din po kay Ma'am Jonalyn Bumanlag.
Okay, Miss Jonalyn
Bumanlag.
Bumanlag.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So, shout out din po, no? So, bago lang siya sa atin. No? Bagong YouTuber natin, no? Okay.
Ito pa, ma'am, si Ma'am Jennifer Matusok. Good evening daw po. Tsaka si Sir Jonathan Nolasco, ma'am.
So, nandyan ulit si Sir Jonathan Nolasco. No, ang dami kong nakita mga online seminars po sa online sellers, no? Ang dami nag-offer ng seminars ngayon sa online sellers. Pero ang masasabi ko lang sa mga online sellers, yung extended na naman po yung deadline for your compliance na ano sinasabi po doon, please yung mga previously earned income ninyo, i-file na po ninyo. Huwag nyo nang hintayin na padalhan po kayo ng sulat, no? Para sa akin, no, isang opinion lang, yung ikinamatay ni Lloyd Cadena na isa yan sa mga naging tense or tension, na nag-create ng tension sa kanya na na-depress siya. No? Kasi sa ngayon pa lang, magkusa na kayo sa mga online sellers na may mga previously earned income, magkusa na kayo. Huwag na kayong maghintay na padahan pa kayo ng sulat kasi mas stiffer ang penalties doon, 50% surcharge. Samantala ngayon, ang ino-offer sa BIR sa inyo, may tax amnesty pa nga na babayaran nyo lang yung basic na walang penalty. No? So magkusa na kayo, mag-voluntary na kayong magbigay ng inyong previously earned income, i-declare nyo na. No? Kasi ang income naman, may mga expenses yan. No? So mag-claim kayo ng expenses at ibayaran niyo kung ano man yung dapat bayaran. Huwag na maghintay na ma-stress pa kayo. No? Kasi bakit ko masabi na isang stress yon sa kay Lloyd Cadena? Kasi yung kanyang mga sinasabi nung bago siya namatay, may mga mechanism na siya na, utang ko lang to yung bahay, na ganun. Sabi ko, natatakot na siya kasi sisingilin po sila ng BIR. At ang income po ng online sellers, naka-record. Sa internet po yan. No? Don't think na sasabihin ninyo na walang record yung online sellers. Dumadaan po yan sa computer at alam nyo na kung ano yung computer. Naka-login po lahat yung mga negosyo nyo na dumadaan sa online sellers. May electronic records po yan. Kaya, huwag na nating hintayin. No? Kasi dagdag pa yan sa stress natin. Kaya ang gagawin natin, magkano man yung previously earned income natin, magkano yung expenses natin, i-claim nyo na kasi yung tinanggap nyo naman doon na pera, hindi nyo naman lahat income yun, no? It might be nalugi pa nga kayo, no? Ang importante lang dyan, in-account nyo at saka nagkaroon kayo ng declaration ng inyong previously earned income. Wag po na pabayaan lang natin. Kasi kung baga sa ngayon, ang gobyerno ang nakikiusap sa atin, huwag na nating paratingin pa doon sa punto na tayo naman ang makikiusap. No? So first time na nanawagan sa atin yung gobyerno, pakinig na tayo at pagbigyan na natin. Huwag na nating hintayin na stiffer yung penalty. Pero mo pagka hindi kayo nag-declare ng previously earned income nyo, 50% kaagad yung surcharge o plus yung mga interest pa, compromise. So, lalong lalaki. Pero kung nag-declare kayo voluntarily, wala pang interest, no? So, kung magkano yung i-declare ninyo, magkano yung tax nyo, yun lang babayaran nyo without any interest. Bakit? Kasi wala pong ka-effort ang gobyerno na kolektahin sa inyo. Pero, pagka naghanap na ng mga ebidensya yung gobyerno at nakita kayo, laki na pala ng mga income nyo online, no? Whether sale of services sa mga vloggers o whether yung sale of goods sa mga online sellers, ang laki na pala ng income nyo tapos hindi kayo nagre-report, doon kayo magkakaproblema. No? So, huwag nang hintayin pa. No? Doon ako believe sa case ng Google, no? Ilalabas namin yan siguro tomorrow. Kasushoot pa lang po namin yung video, ano yung believe ako doon sa Google. Yung Google case sa France, hindi na nila hinintay. Sa prosecution pa lang, inayos na nila, nagbayad na sila. So, bakit alam mo naman yung responsibilidad mo? Bakit pahirapan mo pa yung gobyerno? Lilitisin ka pa kung ano-ano pa mga prosecution. In that case, yung prosecution, hindi na nag-present ng evidence sa Google case. Bakit? Kasi yung Google talagang inadmit na niya na ito yung dapat niya bayaran. So, walang conviction, wala, lahat-lahat nagbayad na kaagad yung Google. No? So, sana ganun yung mentality natin kasi pag pinahirapan mo pa yung gobyerno, siyempre, kaya ng sinasabi ko, surcharge, immediately 50%, no? Unlike na wala ka na sana babayaran pa na penalty. No? Okay, so let's now go to selection of transfer pricing method. No? Yung ating i-discuss po ngayon is the methods na gagamitin po sa transfer pricing, pero mag-entertain pa rin po tayo ng mga question and answers. And yung question and answers po natin, hindi naman siya tungkol lang sa transfer pricing. We entertain also other questions.
Ma'am, meron ma'am tanong si Sir Jonathan Nolasco, ma'am.
Opo.
Paano daw po i-declare yung previously earned income? Through BIR form po ba at ilalagay kung
Yes
anong
po.
year or pupunta po mismo sa RDO?
Kayo po, voluntary po kasi yan. So, sa inyo na lang, gumawa kayo ng total nyo, ng summary, magkano yung total income nyo na na-receive, magkano yung total expenses nyo, tsaka yung mga purchases, i-declare nyo na, tapos i-fill up nyo sa isang BIR form kung anong year yan, halimbawa, 2019, ilagay nyo yan sa BIR form and then i-submit nyo, hintayin nyo yung confirmation, no? Kung may babayaran pa kayo, then sa bangko nyo babayaran. Pero kung wala na, punta na lang kayo sa BIR at patatakan, no? Yung inyong form. Pero maglalagay din kayo ng yung mandatory po na attachment, yung financial statements natin, yung balance sheet, income statement, cash flow, at saka yung statement of equity or yung capital, no? So, yun yung mga mandatory attachment po sa ating income tax return. Voluntary po. Kayo ang gagawa and then patatakan nyo na lang po sa BIR. So, yung pag-file ninyo ng income tax return through the EBIR, no? Yun doon sa internet. And then i-submit nyo. Okay. Okay? So, ako nawagan po talaga ako sa mga online sellers na voluntarily mag-declare na kayo. Hindi naman ganun ka-stricto ang gobyerno basta't may voluntary compliance tayo. No? So, selection of transfer pricing method. Dito na tayo sa selection ng transfer pricing method. So, balikan lang po natin ano po ba itong transfer pricing audit. No? Itong transfer pricing audit, ito yung audit or pag-i-examine sa ating mga business transactions na naka-declare po sa ating income tax return as to the compliance to arm's length principle. Ano po itong arm's length principle? Ito po yung related party transactions should be at par or comparable with the independent party transactions. Kasi sa totoong mga transactions, ang sinusundan talaga yung independent, hindi yung related party. Why? Because the related party transactions has the element of control. So, hindi na yun ang true transactions. The true transaction is the independent transactions because ang determinant ng price is the economic factors, no? Hindi yung control. So, yun talaga ang totoo na transaction. So, sa pagdating sa transfer pricing audit, ang tinitingnan po dito yung proper pricing between related parties. No? So, na-discuss natin na sa inyo nung nakaraan kung paano sinisimulan yung transfer pricing audit. Now, we will go to the selection of transfer pricing method. Kasi di ba sabi natin magko-compare tayo, may comparability analysis, yung may mga ratio tayo na gagamitin. So, ano yung mga methods na gagamitin natin in order to compare? No? Kasi magko-compare na tayo. So, in choosing the transfer pricing method, identifying the availability of comparables and determining the most appropriate transfer pricing method based on facts and conditions are necessary. Bakit based on facts and conditions? Kasi there are cases na wala talagang comparables. Why? Especially if the industry is unique at saka yung transaction is unique na wala ka talagang makita na comparable. So, depende po yan sa kung ano yung transfer pricing method na pwede natin gamitin at i-apply doon sa transactions. No? Okay. Letter A, identify available comparables. So, ano yung mga comparables? So, discuss natin nung nakaraan sa inyo, the internal comparables and the external comparables. No? So, one of the important things in choosing transfer pricing method is the availability of reliable independent comparables. No? Kasi pag independent comparables, ito yung hindi related doon sa ating tested party. No? So, the purpose of this is to ensure availability and reliability of independent comparables to be applied. No? Kasi kailangan talaga natin yung independent comparables. Why? Because without independent comparables, then wala tayong transfer pricing study. We cannot prove na ito arm's length at ito hindi arm's length. No? Only allegations, ang tawag po dyan. Allegations lang, pero wala tayong proof. But through the transfer pricing method, mapapakita natin talaga na may application ng yung arm's length principle. Although, may mga nabasa akong jurisprudence no, sa Europe na nagkaroon sila ng transfer pricing study, nagkaroon ng issue, and then nagkaroon sila ng battle in court, pero without the application of the transfer pricing method. At ang defense ng taxpayer na hindi pwede na walang transfer pricing method na i-apply kasi hindi buo yung transfer pricing study. Pero sabi ng korte, kahit na hindi mo daw ginamit yung transfer pricing method, then there can still be a transfer pricing study. No? Kasi nga, sinasabi nga, especially kung napaka-unique ng industry o kaya ng business transactions na wala ka talagang mahanap na comparables. Okay. So, meron na?
May question,
okay.
ma'am. Medyo marami, ma'am.
Okay,
Unahin
sige
ko
po.
muna, ma'am, si Ma'am Jonaline Bumanlag. Sabi niya po, paano po yung sa previous earned income last year, wala na din po bang charges yun kasi late payment?
Ang sabi po sa regulations na binabasa natin sa inyo nung nakaraan, na yung mag-report kayo ng previously earned income up to September 30, dahil extended na naman po, up to September 30, 2020 without any penalty po. Yun po yung sinasabi doon sa regulations.
Tapos ma'am, si Ma'am Aya Polido, medyo marami ma'am question
Sige
niya.
po.
O yung question niya ma'am, kung yung online seller po ay nakikitira lang sa kakilala, walang
Opo.
sinisingil na rent, pwede bang gamitin yung address niya for business registration sa BIR at ano daw pong required na document?
Ang required po dyan na document is yung siguro affidavit ng may-ari ng place na pinapagamit niya sa inyo for free yung place, no? O yung hinahanap ng BIR, yung title ng lugar, yung tax declaration, proof talaga na yung may-ari ang nagpatira sa inyo at nagbigay ng consent na doon kayo magnenegosyo. No? Kasi ang iniiwasan po dyan ng BIR na at the time na magkaroon na kayo ng mga notices, padalhan kayo ng mga letters, hindi na kayo malocate. No? Kaya sinusure talaga nila na kung sino yung legitimate na may-ari, sila magbibigay ng consent doon sa whoever na mag-stay doon sa lugar na yun. No?
Tapos ma'am, yung comparable data, pwede ho bang gamiting source ay groceries or sari-sari stores? Or dapat talagang galing siya sa mga financial reports ng certain companies within the industry?
Within the industry po, no? Within the industry ang ano dito, ang comparables, no? So although depende kasi po 'yan sa transfer pricing issue. No, so kung yung issue natin halimbawa na magka-crop up, the transfer pricing issue is patungkol sa inventory. So hindi natin maiwasan yung tungkol sa purchases. O kaya is about manufacturing, no? I-determine mo yung mga component ng manufacturing cost, then siguro pwede rin na sa mga purchases, yun ang i-compare mo. Kasi ang issue po sa transfer pricing, napakarami. So, depende yan sa issue na magka-crop up at doon din tayo gagamit ng comparables, doon din tayo gagamit ng mga uh, companies na gagamitin natin sa ating transfer pricing study.
Ito pa ma'am, sa transfer pricing document daw po, isasama lang ho ba doon ang revenues from related parties sa transfer pricing analysis or kasama din po ang expenses incurred from related parties?
Kasama po, kasama yung mga income, kasama din yung mga expenses. Kasama po lahat. Actually, pag gumawa ka ng transfer pricing study, may matrix ka pong gagamitin at lahat ng mga financial ratio, financial information nakalagay po dun sa matrix. Why? Kasi para malaman mo na yung comparables ay talagang totoong comparables. Pareho sila ng assets, pareho sila ng earnings, pareho sila ng gross profit rate, ng net margin, no? So lahat po 'yan tinitingnan. Hindi lang sales, no? Yung comparable uncontrolled price method, ang kino-compare diyan price. So posible na hindi nakasama yung mga expenses diyan. Pero pagdating na sa resale price at saka cost plus method, since gross profit po ang kino-compare diyan, so kasama lahat yung mga direct cost. Pagdating naman sa transactional net profit margin at saka yung profit split, since ang ginagamit diyan is net income, so kasama lahat from the sales, gross direct cost, tapos gross profit, operating expenses, kasama po lahat yan sa computation.
Ito pa ma'am, isa niyang question. Regarding din ma'am doon sa nakikitirang online seller.
Okay.
Paano daw po pag di updated sa pagbayad yung may-ari ng real property tax?
Kung hindi po updated sa real property taxes, hindi po siya kasama doon sa titingnan ng BIR, no? Basta ang titingnan ng BIR diyan, meron siyang rightful na title, siya talaga yung owner, may tax declaration. Kasi yung pagbabayad ng tax naman sa real property, ang may sanction po diyan yung City Hall, no? So pagkuha niyo siguro ng mayor's permit, no? Doon kayo sisingilin naman ng City Hall ng mayor's permit. Pero yung BIR hindi po siya maniningil ng real estate taxes.
Tapos ma'am, si Ma'am Mary Grace Ranrap, may suggestion po. Sana daw po mag-discuss ng transfer pricing cases just like actual tax cases na videos daw po natin.
Sige po. Next time po. Actually, marami po kaming ganyan. No? Sa face-to-face na seminar natin, talagang tayo ng mga videos. So, pwede naman siguro ngayon, Hari, di ba? May ready naman tayo. No? Marami, di ba? Oo, ang dami nating videos, no? Pero tapusin lang po natin itong comparables. Yung sa Al Jazeera, ilang minutes niyo? 20 minutes lang yun, di ba? 20 minutes. So, sige, pwede po tayo, no? Para mas lalong ma-appreciate, mas lalong maintindihan. Ano mo dito, yung Al Jazeera? Sige. No, before we proceed, may mga questions pa ba?
Okay na ma'am yun.
Sige. Before we proceed for 30 minutes, bigay po tayo sa inyo ng video. Ito yung favorite videos ko kasi ito yung mindset ko doon sa mga participants because malalaman nyo kung bakit nagkaroon ng transfer pricing at malalaman nyo kung ano itong mga nangyayari at ito yung kinocure na po ng transfer pricing. Hindi to case, pero this is the situation na ina-answer po ng transfer pricing.
A new report shows some of the world's richest people hid more than $30 trillion in offshore tax havens. Should these tax avoidance institutions be allowed to exist? And why do wealthy individuals hide their money abroad? Is it greed or lack of trust in their governments? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to Inside Story. I'm Stephen Cole. A couple of weeks ago, we learned that Barclays traders had been deliberately lying about fixing LIBOR interest rates to maximise their own profits on currency dealings. A week later, we heard that one of the world's biggest banks, HSBC, has apologised for allowing drugs gangs to launder billions of dollars. Now, we're told the super rich and their families are hiding away as much money as the combined GDPs of the US and Japan, a staggering $32 trillion. Yes, that's 32, followed by 12 noughts. Out of an estimated world population of 7 billion people, just 10 million people hold offshore accounts containing $32 trillion. And half of that amount is owned by just 100,000 people. They surely are the super rich. It's thought that $500 billion has left Russia since 1990, and so the tax on that money has not been invested in the home country. In sub-Saharan Africa, if governments there had been able to tax the many hundreds of billions sent abroad, it would have been enough to pay off their crippling debts. Despite the criticism it can attract, the process is legal and is used on a daily basis by banks around the world. Well, tax loopholes and tax havens are exploited by multinationals and the super rich to avoid paying high taxes. If tax evasion is a crime, tax avoidance aims to pay the minimum possible without still breaking the law. Among the recent high-profile cases is the British comedian Jimmy Carr, who in one scheme managed to shelter $5.2 million a year. Prime Minister David Cameron described the comedian's arrangements as morally wrong. But when French President François Hollande pledged to tax the super rich at 75%, Cameron invited wealthy French individuals to emigrate to the UK in order to avoid the tax. As for the companies in the United Kingdom, Vodafone and the Topshop Arcadia Group also are accused of avoiding tax. Topshop's owner has been criticised for living in a tax haven and still using public services, but without wanting to pay for them. Another recent case is how the world's most profitable technology company sidestepped paying billions in taxes. Apple was a pioneer of an accounting technique known as the double Irish with a Dutch sandwich. It reduces taxes by routing profits through Irish subsidiaries in the Netherlands and then to the Caribbean. Today, that tactic is used by hundreds of other corporations. So, why do tax havens exist, and should they continue to exist? To answer that question and many others, we're joined by our guests in Geneva. Jean-Pierre Dizerend is a General Secretary of the Convention of Independent Financial Advisors. Also in Geneva, Mirat Zaki, and she is a best-selling financial author who wrote Banking Secrecy is Dead, Long Live the Tax Evasion. She's also the deputy editor of the financial magazine Bilan. And in Brussels, Sony Kapoor is the managing director of Redefine, an international think tank that advises governments and policymakers on economic and financial sector policy. Welcome to all of you. But I'm going to start with Mirat Zaki. $21 trillion is being hidden in offshore bank accounts. Is there any evidence of illegality by corporations and rich individuals there?
Well, first I need to say that there is a double standard. Switzerland has no longer the right to hide offshore assets, at least from Europe and the US. But in other places like the Delaware and Wyoming US states, like Jersey and Guernsey, things are totally different. There is much financial opacity there and still many offshore accounts that are allowed to be there. And when you talk about illegality, well, I would say that tax avoidance, if it is aggressively done, it can fringe on tax evasion. And if it is aggressive tax evasion, it can fringe on tax fraud. So, you know, it is a continuum. And there is much subjectivity and arbitrariness in judging what is legal and illegal. But I would say that in any case, I deem it rather illegitimate, that's for sure. There is too much of that money going out of countries, and I believe it is never coming back because it has enjoyed so much such top-level financial advice, and it is structured in such complex and sophisticated Anglo-Saxon entities that it's very difficult to detect and to dismantle.
Oh, so it's the Anglo-Saxons' fault, is it? Jean-Pierre Disserens, you heard what Mazzaki had to say, more illegitimate than illegal. What's your view? Are offshore banks and their customers doing anything wrong?
Well, what the offshore banks and their customers are doing is using the law and, to a certain extent, abusing the law, which the Anglo-Saxon structures gives them entirely the possibility to do. So if we're talking about people trying to pay less taxes, taxes is just an expense on your P&L. And if you legally, through complicated structures, can save money to have that money invested in other things than just paying off governments who have managed their accounts in a terrible way over the last 20 years and reinvest that money in productive industry, and they use the legal way to do it, so be it, you know. What we have to know is that there are two things in the offshore money. There is the money, I think, that has been earned honestly in honest business, and then there is another part of money that's much darker, and that's the money of organized crime. And I believe that right now, when we look at what is happening with the governments ultimately are trying, because of their dramatic mismanagement of public funds, trying to recuperate the money they have willingly let go into tax havens by not accusing themselves for having let this go, but by accusing those companies who have taken the benefit that was offered to them.
Of hiding their money. Sonia Kapoor, you're sitting in Brussels. What do Europe's major policymakers of offshore tax havens and tax avoidance there?
Well, before I go into that, I think if you don't mind, I'd just like to comment on what's been said. I think it's very appropriate to say that there are shades of grey. There's a whole spectrum from tax avoidance to tax fraud. And it's also true that there's legitimate wealth which is undertaxed and there's criminal wealth. That having been said, there are two elements that are common to this whole discussion. And those two elements are there are regimes that have low tax rates, 0 to very low tax rate. Many of the tax havens have 0. Ireland has 12.5%. And the second very crucial element is secrecy. And it's the combination of these two that actually makes tax havens very attractive destinations for money that is tax avoiding, tax evasion, for criminal enterprises, for corrupt proceeds, including dictators from third world countries.
So what would you do, Sonia? What would Brussels do? What would Brussels do? Would they make them less secret? Would they make them more accountable? Do you say to the Cayman Islands, do you say to Liechtenstein, Switzerland, Bermuda, OK, you've got to open your books to us?
Yes. So there's several things that can be done. One is what you can do at the source. And several countries have taken some steps. So there have been cases in the United Kingdom where the government has forced banks to reveal the names of their offshore clients. That's one step that could be replicated. The second thing is tackle the intermediaries. It's the financial service providers, accounting firms, legal firms, as well as banks. And the HSBC case is an example. By making the financial intermediaries liable, you significantly choke the flow of such money. And the third is action against tax havens. And the US has demonstrated some advantage of this. The US is punching its economic weight to get islands such as the Cayman Islands and with the UBS deals, countries such as Switzerland, to take a much more cooperative approach. The European Union has failed to do that, where every country is trying to act on its own, and it doesn't doesn't help that Luxembourg and Austria are tax havens of their own nature. So we need a collective response where the threat of sanctions, of choking off flows to these countries is enough to ensure more compliance and cooperation.
OK, well, let's have a look at tax havens, that issue, seems to raise it. And then, Marit, we'll come to you for an answer. We spoke to the economist John Christensen from the Tax Justice Network, an organisation which is, as you all know, fiercely critical of tax havens.
In many cases, it's the politicians and their cronies and their families and so on, and the business people who sponsor the political parties who are using these offshore services themselves. So they've got no personal interest in closing it down. If they wanted to close it down, they could do it tomorrow. You know, it's not a question of rocket science. It's not difficult to do that. All they have to do is to improve information exchange between countries. They can require disclosure of information about offshore accounts, offshore companies, offshore trusts. The fact of the matter is they don't want to do it because they themselves are complicit with the process.
Mira Zaki, let's bring you in on this one.
Yeah.
Tax systems are complex, and what is acceptable may not always be clear. And we've just heard from Soni Kapoor asking for more transparency. Is that likely?
Yes. No, well, there is considerable limitations to this very honest policy that he recommends. First, there is the double standards issue. The fact that the Caribbean and Florida tax havens and Wyoming and Delaware and Nevada are places that are protected by the US government. They don't want to touch these places, so that even nowadays they remain opaque and they refuse to exchange information with countries such as Brazil or Mexico, whom taxpayers are evading towards the US shores. The second issue is that there are certain entities that are totally escaping nowadays any kind of information exchange. And I think of the international trust. There are types of international trust, such as the discretionary and irrevocable trust and foundations of the same kind. Those structures are very expensive and are so difficult to detect and to identify and to trace back to the beneficiary that you simply cannot exchange any type of information. They escape all the treaties and conventions that have been signed between countries, so that if you're a big wealthy family and you put your money there, there's no amount of government investigation and power that will be able to detect those entities. And I have concrete examples of extremely rich French families who have organized their wealth in such a way, using several multi-jurisdictions actually, and you can never find them back. So unfortunately, first there is the lack of willingness that John Christensen said, and Mr. Kapoor said that we could really find ways to make them disclose those jurisdictions, but there is real secrecy there, financial secrecy, not banking secrecy, financial secrecy surrounding those entities in the Caribbean and Pacific jurisdiction and Asian jurisdictions that make it impossible to apply those transparency policies.
OK, well, we're looking at the big banks as well, but Jean-Pierre Dizerens, I wonder if you think, I mean, does anybody know how much you earn? Probably not, because you're not going to tell people how much you earn. Money is a very private issue, and you're not going to get governments or banks releasing details of individual accounts, are you?
Well, you know, the privacy issue is certainly something wealthy people will always defend, because right now in this world, to be rich can be very dangerous, and one has to be very careful when they have money. Don't forget that rich people have been the targets of defamation over the last years. We hear, you know, everybody attacks rich people. And why
that's
are
jealousy.
Rich
that's normal.
people
You always
attacked?
attack rich people because you're jealous they've got so much money. But the point is, nobody is going to release information. And the tax havens are not accountable to anybody, are they?
Well, the tax havens, is it correct to say tax havens?
Well, that's what they are.
Isn't it a financial safe haven where people can direct their investments the way they feel they can do it? Best do it for themselves and for the future of the money they have earned honestly. And I like to insist on the term honestly, because we have to be very careful not to mix the criminal money with the money that has been generated from
well, this is a very important point, Jean-Pierre, because how can you tell down there in the vaults which money has come from money laundering and which money has come from somebody's piggy bank somewhere, somebody's savings? Sony Kapoor.
Yes, just on that point, I think this is an argument that is often used by people who support tax havens, that, there's a security issue. It may be that rich people in Colombia or Mexico face some problems, but that doesn't justify the existence of tax havens. The second is, if it is honest money, then by definition it is not money that is needed to be secreted away in an opaque jurisdiction such as a tax haven. And I'd like to support the point that the previous speaker made. There is definitely a double standard wherein banking secrecy is targeted and jurisdictions such as Delaware and the City of London, which are equally complicit. It's a problem that afflicts both. So when I mention the policy recommendations that we are talking about, that needs to be applied across the board to banks and non-banks financial secrecy issues. The fact of the matter is that this is a collective action problem, not too different from tackling climate change. We estimated a few years back that for every additional euro of revenue that a government such as the Cayman Islands earned from being a tax haven, it led to a loss of about 25 euros of tax revenue to legitimate economies, both developed and developing. So one could actually think of a scenario where there's an international agreement that says, okay, you're a small island economy, you can't have, too much of a diverse economy. We are going to give you aid. But there's a collective clampdown against this tax haven. The additional tax revenues would be more than enough to compensate the countries that lose out,
right,
that are remote islands in the middle of nowhere. But at the same time, tackle corruption, tackle crime, and tackle the rising problem of inequality.
Well, there is always a journalistic saying, isn't there? Sort of follow the money, and you'll come to where the crime begins.
Yes.
Mirat Zaki, there are trillions of dollars being secreted abroad in offshore tax havens. That works out, we reckon, on Inside Story, that works out at $280 billion in lost income tax revenues. And that is a huge black hole in the world economy. And I'm thinking if all the money from Greece that wasn't paid in taxes was released from some of these banks, you wouldn't have a problem.
Exactly. So this is making the burden on us, the middle class, get even heavier, because we have to pay double tax. But it's not just the middle class, is it,
Marat? It's also the working class. If you take that money out of the economy, it means taxes are going to be high for the people right at the bottom as well.
For the bottom, maybe they're paying less taxes, but I'd say that the middle class is paying the heaviest burden because they earn reasonably well. But of course, the working class as well. So that the people who are in the real economy, who have honest salaries, are having to pay much more to compensate for the ultra-rich evasion, against which we can't do much, because if you're ultra-rich, you can buy yourself basically a license to evade. It's a luxury product nowadays. Evading, getting yourself an offshore trust is a luxury product. So if you have the money to buy it, you'll evade. If you are a medium-sized wealth, you have not really the means to evade, so you have to declare. So this is the point now. So there is an enormous parallel market, the market of the wealthiest tax evasion, that is a flourishing market, and it is the Anglo-Saxon financial industry that has captured most of it, and also the Asian centers like Hong Kong. So that if London and Washington and China don't participate in this collective talk about tax evasion, nothing can be done.
Exactly. And
These three powers have to
when we
participate.
talk about all the hidden money going abroad, it's been estimated in Britain that there would be a tuppence in the pound reduction in taxes right at the lowest end of the country. But Jean-Pierre Desarens, you believe that people have a right to tax havens, a human right. But what do you think about the money just sitting there in the vault in these very unequal times when people are very aware of the disparities in wealth and income around there, more aware than any time before? And don't you suspect that people are going to be gunning for you and gunning for these tax havens?
Well, what I see in these discussions, it's regretful. We just mix everything. You know, the criminal money, the tax avoidance, the other taxation, and so on. Now, what I'd like to say is that that money doesn't just sit in a vault. You know, that money is invested. That money, if earned honestly, is invested in the real economy, and it is creating jobs. It's just the cost factor of excessive taxation that has been reduced. Now, what do you say if you have money and a president of a country tells you that everything you earn above so much is going to be taxed by 75%? Now, we have to be careful, and we have to know who is the owner of the income generated by a creative individual who is creating added value. Who does that added value belong to? Does it belong to the state in which he's a resident or of which he holds a passport? Or does he own that added value and therefore is entitled to dispose of it? Now, I think we have a basic question, and we have to ask who is the owner of the funds generated by creative minds. And creative minds look at what happened with IT companies, what they have brought, and these people have become immensely rich because they are creative, because they create added value, and of course, these people will try to maximize their income and reduce the tax burden. Now, this is not a criminal activity.
And Sonia Kapoor, we've worked out that less than 100,000 people own about $10 trillion worth of wealth, and nations even dwarfs the debts they owe. How much blame for this situation lies at the door, once again, of the banks because of so much uncertainty in the banking world and rules and tax complexities?
Well, what's really not brought out in the discussion is the very strong interlinkage between financial instability and the so-called tax havens. And I can give you an example. I used to trade derivatives, and it's been estimated that between a quarter to a third of all the derivatives trade, and we are talking here about $600 trillion every year, is in one way or the other linked to efforts to reduce the tax burden. So financial instability, and what happened after Lehman collapsed was it was a mid-sized bank, but it was because nobody else knew which other bank had Lehman-like exposure or which other bank was exposed to Lehman, that Lehman's collapse led to the complete collapse of the financial system. And this uncertainty, the same tools which are used, which is the opaque legal tools using tax havens that are used to avoid taxes, are also the tools that have been used to minimize capital requirements to avoid financial regulation. So to the extent that financial instability and tax avoidance and tax evasion go together, this is hugely dangerous. And I think that banks lie at the heart of the system, because no matter whether you're using trust or whether you're using secret bank accounts, it is the banks which eventually channel the money, even if it goes into investment.
As the question suggested, everything comes back to the banks, doesn't it? There is a saying, there are only two certainties in life, death and taxes. Until now, of course, unless, of course, you are a major corporation or you have very expert tax advisors. Thank you to our guests in Geneva, Jean-Pierre Dizerens, also in Geneva, Mirat Zaki, and in Brussels, Sony Kapoor. And thank you very much for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. If you want to send us your feedback, just email your thoughts to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Thanks for watching from me, Stephen Cole. Goodbye.
May question na?
Meron no?
Sige. Okay, so you just have seen the video on Al Jazeera, no? Courtesy of Al Jazeera. So thank you po sa Al Jazeera, no? As a point of discussion po natin, na-discuss po doon yung tungkol sa tax haven, no? So yung mga financial transactions, the banks, the tax evasion, napaka-importante po at magkakarugtong yung mga yun, yung tax evasions at saka yung tinatawag natin na financial transactions, no? Saka yung mga tax haven. No, but before that, tuloy po muna tayo at mag-discuss tayo ng question.
Ma'am, shoutout ko muna ma'am si Ma'am Mary Ann Matabuena.
Hi, shout out, Miss Mary Ann.
Tapos si Ma'am Rosel Malveda, good evening daw po. Tapos Ma'am
Sino yun?
Rosel Malveda.
Shout out, Miss Rosel Malvida.
Tapos Ma'am, sabi po ni Ma'am Aya Polido, swerte naman ng mga elites, they can avoid such taxes by taking advantage of those tax havens. Parang license to evade tax nga talaga.
Sa iba pa pong pagkasabi, paying of taxes for those who can afford to hire tax experts, paying of taxes is just an option, no? Kasi pwede silang hindi magbayad ng tax. Kasi may mga tax experts sila na magtuturo sa kanila kung paano gagawin.
Tapos Ma'am, question ni Ma'am Mary Grace Randrap, meron po bang current talks ang mga countries to eradicate tax avoidance?
Yun po yung transfer pricing. That's why transfer pricing is a very powerful tool to curb tax evasion. Actually, yung video po na yan, video po ng Al Jazeera, ginagamit ko po yan sa mga lectures ko to mind the set, no, the participants of what is happening in the world that demands na kailangan may action na yung gobyerno. Kasi yung ibang gobyerno nagde-declare na ng bankruptcy kasi hindi na nagbabayad ng taxes ang mga nagninegosyo, no? And they make use of the tax haven. And kailangan na. And the only thing, no, na nagkaroon ng consensus ang international community through the OECD or the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, at dyan po yung Center of Policies and Tax Administration in the world, yung in-adapt nila po yung arm's length principle na yun yung ginagamit ng transfer pricing para i-tax audit, transfer pricing audit na tinatawag natin, itong mga gumagawa ng mga scheme para hindi magbayad ng taxes.
Tapos Ma'am, sabi niya pa rin po, kindly expound po sa sinabi na the middlemen and those earning honest income are the ones bearing the burden of tax manipulation of the super rich.
Bakit? Bakit po nangyayari yung ganon na ang middle class ang nagbabayad ng tamang taxes? Kasi ang middle class po, usually, ang source of income nila hindi business. Ito yung mga middle class, mga middle executive, they are employees. At alam nyo naman, lalo-lalo na dito sa Pilipinas, ang mga employees, wala pong kawala. Bakit? Kasi bago mo tanggapin yung sweldo mo, nakaltas na yung tax, no? And yung mga middle income earners are taxed on gross. Walang mga deductions, no? So kung mapapansin mo, walang tax evasion na nangyayari sa middle class. Lahat ng income ng middle class nakaltas na, nabayaran na ng buwis. So sino yung may mga tax savings? Yung nasa upper class, yung mga negosyante. Bakit? Because they are allowed to claim itemized deductions, no? At saka sila yung mga kumikita ng bilyon-bilyon, but at the end, at ang bottom line is net loss lang, wala palang binabayaran na tax, no? Saan pa nangyayari? Sa value added tax, pinapasa ang value added tax sa consumer, pero magkano lang yung binabalik nila sa gobyerno na payment ng value added tax. Why? Kasi binigyan din sila ng loophole na lahat ng purchases nila, pwede nilang i-claim na deductions doon sa output tax. So ano nangyayari? Yung middle class talaga ang burden na pumapasan ng tax burden kasi sila nung babayad ng 100%. Okay? So, hopefully na kapag bigay tayo ng information, no, na mindset kayo about the transfer pricing and how important transfer pricing is. Kaya nga itong transfer pricing, this is the most effective tool to curb tax evasion. No? Kaya nga tawag dito sa transfer pricing, this is economic taxation. Why? Kasi hindi tinitingnan lang dito yung form ng business or whatever. It goes into substance, no? Kaya dito actually isa ito sa mga pinresent ko sa international community, no? During the international or world convention po ng WIPO, itong beneficial owner and the legal owner. No? Napakalaking impact po niyan. Why? Kasi sino ba yung legal owner? Ito yung sa kanya lang pinapangalan na legal owner, pero ang totoo may beneficial owner na sila talaga yung nakikinabang. Kaya most of the time sa ganung sitwasyon, ang kawawa, ang legal owner, kasi legally siya yung owner na siya dapat ang nanginginabang, pero ang totoo pala, pinangalan lang sa kanya. And even the tax treaties, mayroon din diyang concept na legal owner at saka beneficial owner. Kasi bakit? Sa isang bansa na may magandang tax treaty, yung bansa na nagkaroon ng negosyo, yung may-ari, halimbawa, yung negosyante, mag-create siya ngayon ng subsidiary doon sa bansa na may tax advantage ang tax treaty. And then, i-channel niya doon yung income niya to avail of the lower tax rate bago yung net na income kukunin na ulit ng parent company, no? So, yun yung mga sinasabi natin na beneficial owner, pero hindi naman talaga siya ang totoo na owner ng income. Idinaan lang siya doon sa isang conduit company niya, yung ginawa niya na subsidiary, para hindi matax ng mataas. No? So, nakakarb po yan ng transfer pricing. Nakukure yan ng transfer pricing. Why? Kasi pag nag-audit ka ng transfer pricing, pag may nakita ka ng ganyang klaseng sitwasyon, pwede mo siyang i-disallow na conduit company o kaya walang form, walang economic substance. No? Okay. Okay. So, we have to identify now the available comparables. Balik po tayo sa transfer pricing methods. One of the important things in choosing transfer pricing method is the availability of reliable independent comparables. No? So, the purpose of this is to ensure availability. Slides na. Of independent comparables to be applied. So, comparables to be identified can be in the form of prices data. For example, market prices for commodities. No, isang example lang po 'yan na ang data natin can be price. No, data or margin of gross profit, so pwede rin, or data or margin of net profits. No? So pwede rin natin siyang gamitin sa comparables. Comparables used to test transaction of the taxpayers with their related parties can be grouped into internal comparable and external comparable, no? So, ayun ang gulaw. Okay. Internal comparables, no? Internal comparables are obtained when the tested party, ito po yung sinasubject natin sa transfer pricing audit, no? When the tested party engages in sale transactions or purchases of goods, services with unrelated parties, no? So, internal comparables yan. So, ibig sabihin, yung party natin, meron siyang transactions doon sa party or company na hindi siya related. Ibig sabihin, independent party. Example, are licensing of intangible property to unrelated parties. No? So, may intangible siya, ni-license niya doon sa unrelated parties. Ano yung magiging issue doon? Yung charges na royalty sa pagpagamit niya ng license. No? Imposition of interest rates, interest payments on loans to unrelated parties. Ano yung magiging issues dito? Yung rate of interest. No? And other factors that need to be confirmed in identifying reliable internal comparables. So, including the following. Ano to? Ensure that the internal comparables are not transactions that were performed solely to justify that the related party transaction at our arm's length. Tama ba yun? Dugtong? Okay. Example, ito example na to ha. TMD Corporation, a manufacturer of agricultural machinery, sells part of its product through LAC Inc., its subsidiary in country X. In addition, TMD Corporation also sells a small amount of its products, 3WG, to FEL Limited, an independent distributor in country Y. So, the economic conditions in country X and country Y are relatively similar. So, given to sa information na yung country X and country Y relatively similar. To use the sale transactions to FEL Limited as internal comparables, it must first be confirmed that these independent transactions are not performed solely to justify that the affiliated transactions are at arm's length. Kasi po, ang ginagawa ng iba, meron na rin silang connection doon sa independent party para kung gamitin man nila na comparables, hindi na sila magkakalayo in favor of the related parties. No? Perform solely means that if EL Limited is not economically dependent from its transaction with TMD Corporation to qualify it as an external comparable, no? Kasi independent talaga siya. Hindi pwede na dependent siya sa TMD Corporation. Otherwise, hindi siya mag-qualified na comparables. Ensure that internal comparables are independent transactions performed in the normal course of business. So, make sure na ang internal comparables mo are really independent transactions performed in the normal course of business. Why normal course of business? Kasi pagka may nangyayari na hindi pangkaraniwan, hindi rin siya pwede na gamitin mo na internal comparables. No? So, example number 5. At the start of the year, TMD Corp, a manufacturer of agricultural machinery, sells product 3WG to LAC Inc., its subsidiary in country X. However, at the end of that year, TMD Corp goes bankrupt. No? Nag-bankrupt yung TMD and has to liquidate its inventory by selling all its product 3WG at a liquidation price. So, sabi natin, normal course of business. Yun bang liquidation price? Normal course of business? Of course not. No? So, hindi na siya normal course of business kasi nag-liquidate na siya. Because this liquidation sale is not conducted under normal business conditions, the sales of TMD Corp at the time of the liquidation cannot be used as an independent comparable in determining the fair price of TMD Corp's products to LAC Inc. Siyempre, in this case, hindi na normal course of business kasi nag-liquidate na siya, ibig sabihin magkuklose na. At alam naman natin, pagka-closing out sale, talagang mas mababa yung presyo, no? Kasi hindi na siya going concern. Letter C, ensure comparability between the related party transactions and the internal comparables by considering the 5 comparability factors as enumerated in RR number 2-2013. Actually, ang source po nitong RR 2-2013 is the OECD Transfer Pricing Guidelines. And these are the 5 comparability factors. Ibig sabihin, yung 5 comparability factors, always po yan na ginagamit when you compare, no? Regardless kung anong method yung gagamitin mo. So what are these 5 comparability factors? Number 1, characteristic of goods and services. Ito yung kasama yung nature, no, ng goods and services. Anong klaseng goods and services ba yan, no? And then we have the number 2, FAR analysis or the functions, assets, and risk. Ano po itong functions? Ito yung activity niya. Ano pang ginagawa niya, no? Functions. Saan yan makikita? Sa ECEC, Articles of Incorporation, dun sa purpose, at makikita din ito sa line of activities doon sa COR or Certificate of Registration sa BAR, at makikita din po ito doon sa Mayor's Permit. So yan lahat ng mga dokumento na yan dapat pare-pareho sila na sinasabi, otherwise magkaroon ng discrepancy, no, sa functions. Assets, ano naman tong assets? Ito yung assets na mayroon ang isang company, no? Bakit napaka-importante na i-determine mo yung assets? Kasi kung depende sa nature niya, especially if asset-oriented yung company, hindi siya makapag-operate kung wala siyang assets, no? At ano pa ang isang importance ng assets? Pagka may assets ka, doon mo ginamit, doon mo invest yung pera mo, no? Kasi assets yan eh. So halimbawa yung assets mo, 100 million, natutulog lang, hindi naman ginagamit sa business. So may ibig sabihin yan. No? You're just wasting your money. No? Wala siyang economic substance in that case. Function, assets, the R is risk. No? And risk is a very important factor to determine sa comparability po. No? Bakit? Ano ba ang risk? At sino yung may-ari ng risk? Who controls the risk and who owns the risk? Who owns the risk na pag nandiyan na yung risk, siya yung magbabayad. No? And who controls the risk? Ito yung nagbibigay o nag-impose ng ownership of the risk, no? So kasi between related parties, pwede nilang gawin lang to o pag-usapan lang, no? Not necessarily na, ikaw si manufacturer, sa iyo yung risk ng defective goods. Hindi. Pwedeng sabihin niya ng parent company na manufacturer na ikaw si subsidiary, ikaw si distributor, sa iyo na yung risk ng defective goods, no? Pwede. So yun yung sinasabi natin na ownership and control of the risk. And may isa pa, yung capacity to assume the risk, no? Kasi kahit sabihin pa ng parent mo na, ikaw ang mag-assume ng risk for the defective goods, ikaw na subsidiary, wala ka namang capacity to assume that risk. So, may transfer pricing issue pa rin. No? Number 3 is the contractual forms, no? Or contractual terms. Ang dami pong mga cases that reaches the Supreme Court in some jurisdiction na ang pinagtatalunan the contractual terms. Ang dami po, no? Yung mga famous na cases, yung Australia versus Glencore, no? The Australian Tax Authority, yung prices ng copper nila, ng mining, na ang pinag-uusapan yung terms and conditions on the pricing of the goods. Contractual terms din po yun, no? So determine, especially if the provision in the contract are not arm's length, no? In favor or one-sided in favor of one party, hindi siya arm's length, then anong mangyayari? Magkakaroon ng adjustment, no? At anong effect na adjustment? Deficiency taxes. No? Number 4, economic circumstances. Ano to economic circumstances? Example dito, ito yung COVID, no? COVID-19 na to. Ano to? Nangyayari. Ang laki ng impact nito sa ating economic conditions. Why? Imagine lahat ng businesses nag-close. So what happened? No? So malaki yung impact sa business, no, that we have to consider. So during the year 2020, when we make our transfer pricing analysis, nakakalagay po talaga dyan ang economic conditions, no? And the number 5 is the business strategies. So business strategies can be different strategies na ginagawa po ng business para magkaroon lang sila ng, halimbawa sa marketing, magkaroon sila ng market share. No? So pwede nilang ibenta ng palugi or mababa na presyo yung kanilang goods just to attract new customers, no? But itong business strategies, short term lang po to, hindi pwedeng long term. Why? Kasi nagtatapon ka na ng pera, especially if your business strategies is not effective, then abandon it. Hindi pwede na tuloy-tuloy mo yung business strategies mo na you are losing. No? So, yun po yung mga 5 comparability factors na under Revenue Regulations 2-2013, which ang sabi ko sa inyo naman galing din sa OECD Transfer Pricing Guidelines. No? So, what are, kanina pinag-usapan natin yung internal comparables between the related parties. No? Ngayon naman, external comparables. No? The external comparables that can be used to test the arm's length nature of related party transactions may be in the form of the following but not limited to. Letter A, ito yung example ng external comparables. Market price of commodity products or price of similar goods, services traded by unrelated parties such as gold, silver, crude, palm oil, coal, and other commodity products. Alam nyo itong mga example dito. Usually ito yung mga commodities na may mga cases na sa court because of transfer pricing issues. No? So yung gold, silver, crude, palm oil, no? Coal, other commodity products. Meron pang yung sa Canada, yung uranium, very unique na mineral products. No? Yung sa Australia, yung copper. No? Tsaka yung sa Africa, yung sa macadamia. Ano ba yung macadamia? Di ba yung linalagay sa mga chocolates? No? Macadamia fruits. No? Kakaroon din sila ng issues sa transfer pricing. Okay. Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas offered rate. Ito yung interest rate. Philippine Securities and Exchange Commission database, commercial databases. No? So, diyan manggagaling po yung ating external comparables. No? Okay. So, letter B, choose the TPM that is most appropriate to the facts and conditions. Ano yung TPM, transfer pricing methods? And what are the transfer pricing methods na pinag-aralan na natin? The 5 transfer pricing methods. We have the CAP or the comparable uncontrolled price method. We have the resale price method, the cost plus method, the transactional net margin method, and the profit split methods. Yung 5 na yun. No? So, what are the factors that need to be considered in selecting the transfer pricing that is most appropriate to the facts and conditions? Facts and conditions po ng case, no, na under audit or yung tested party. No? So, number 1, advantages and disadvantages of its method. No? So, advantages and disadvantages. Bakit? Kasi may mga disadvantages yan at saka disadvantages. Halimbawa, yung CAP method. Ano ba ang kino-compare mo? The price. Kasi ang sabi dyan, comparable uncontrolled price method. So, ano advantages ng CAP method? Napaka-accurate niya. Kasi price to price, ibangga mo yung price eh. But, ang hirap, kasi hahanapin mo yung parehong product. In terms of quality, in terms of pagkakagawa, lahat-lahat na. No? So, ang hirap maghanap ng parehong na product. No? So, yun ang disadvantages naman. Ang hirap maghanap ng comparables. Number 2, appropriateness of the transfer pricing method to the basic nature of the transaction determined based on functions, asset, and risk analysis. No? So, appropriateness of the transfer pricing method. No? So, ano yung mga methods na kasunod dun sa comparable uncontrolled price? The resale price method, the cost plus method. No? So, nature of the transaction na po yung titingnan natin. Number 3, availability of reliable information in connection with independent comparables to apply the method that is chosen and or other methods. Ito na ang pinakamahirap, yung data ng external comparables. Hindi mahirap kung yung comparables mo traded. Why? Kasi available in public yung mga records. Pero pagka hindi traded, sobrang hirap kasi saan ka kukuha ngayon ng source ng comparables mo, no? Aside from the SEC, sa Securities and Exchange Commission. Kasi ako sinubukan ko na gumawa ng study no, na ang ginamit ko yung sa banana industry at ang ginagamit ko kasi ang daming producers na co-op, no, cooperative. Sobrang hirap na nag-request kami ng mga financial information from the CDA. No, anong nangyari doon, Hari, sa request natin sa CDA? Not available on data. When in fact, public records po yung records nila. Kasi sa easy para doon sa private corporations, Cooperative Development Authority, doon naman sa mga cooperatives. And for all you know, itong mga cooperatives, ito yung mga malalaking businesses na walang tax, hindi nagbabayad ng tax. No? So, ang daming mga banana planters na cooperative sila. So, doon kami naghanap ng financial statement para sa aming comparables dun sa transfer pricing study ng isang banana planters, no? But ilang years na tayo nag-request? 3 years na? 3 years na. 3 years na. So, ang sabi lang hindi available, no? So, sobrang hirap ng availability ng information, no? Okay, so number 4, level of comparability between the related party transaction and the transactions between independent parties, including reliability of adjustments made to eliminate the material influence of any differences. No? So yung level of comparability, parehong-pareho ba talaga sila? Kasi kung hindi sila pareho, magkaroon ka ng adjustment. No? At nagkaroon ka ng adjustment para maging similar sila. No? To choose the most appropriate method in a transfer pricing case, it needs information in respect of factors of comparability, spatially information of FAR, functions, assets, and risks, of all related parties entering into transaction with taxpayer, including related party existing abroad. Depende kasi sa scope ng transfer pricing analysis na gagawin mo, pagka group of companies siya na ang scope niya worldwide talaga yung hahanapin mo rin ng mga comparables. No? Kasi ang naranasan ko na ginagawaan ko ng mga transfer pricing analysis, puro domestic lang. Kaya ang scope dito lang sa Pilipinas. Why? Why hindi ako kumukuha ng mga may related party existing abroad? Kasi wala akong data, wala akong information, o kung meron man, napakamahal. No? So, yung mga kinukuha ko ng karamihan, dito lang locally. No? Kasi saan ako kumuha ng information? Sa easy lang. Dahil nga, yung sinabi ko sa inyo na yung information coming from the CDA, Cooperative Development Authority, hindi available. When in fact, yun sana yung isang sources ng information. Kasi nga, karamihan ng mga planters cooperative. No? Planters ng banana. Okay. Meron na? Question?
Meron.
Sige.
Galing po kay Ma'am Mary Grace Randrap. Ang tanong niya, ma'am, kasama po ba sa transfer pricing course yung from the side or perspective of the company, how to use legal or allowed transfer pricing ways to help companies reduce taxes? Parang may doktong, ma'am, kumbaga daw po, transfer pricing from audit perspective and transfer pricing from business perspective.
Actually, yung tinuturo po natin karamihan sa mga case study natin sa perspective po ng business, no? Kaso lang ako, kasi yung orientation ko, galing ako sa gobyerno, orientation ko, talaga nag-o-audit ako in favor of the government. Kaya palagi ko na rin nare-relate sa ito yung magiging findings, ito yung magiging mangyayari kung ma-audit kayo ng BAR, no? Yung nasa akin na yung effect, yung posibleng findings pag na-audit kayo, no? Pero yung ating mga ideas dito, yung ating mga pinag-uusapan, perspective po ito ng company. Okay. Sige. Okay. So, selection of tested party is carried on based on functional analysis, already prepared, unreliability of data, proofs, information, as well as facts obtained in audit. Sa experience ko, yung facts obtained in audit, depende ito sa documents na isasubmit sa atin ng taxpayer. No? Kasi kung kulang, kung kakaunti yung dokumento, so how can you make a good audit? No? So the revenue officer can choose taxpayer, which is being audited taxpayer, as tested party. Okay. So factors that require attention in choosing the tested party include the following, no? So ano tong tested party? Ito yung under audit natin, or ito yung, pwede rin tayong gumamit ng third party, no? But pag be sure lang na pag gumamit ka ng third party, talagang mapatunayan mo na related siya doon sa under transfer pricing audit mo. The tested party is generally the party that has the less complex functions. For example, the party that does not have unique, valuable, intangible property, no? If the tested party is located abroad, the revenue officer should confirm the reliability of the information regarding the tested party. For example, by requesting data, information on financial statements, or other data from taxpayer, and or performing an exchange of information with the competent authority in the country concerned. Paano po ginagawa yan, ng exchange of information? I-course through na yan sa commissioner, and then the commissioner will request through the DFA or the Department of Foreign Affairs, then requesting the other country to provide information kasi under tax audit po yung taxpayer. No? So po pwede na po yan ngayon. If the revenue officers cannot confirm the reliability and adequacy of information of a related party located abroad that was to be tested, the revenue officers can select the taxpayer or another related party as the tested party. No? So you abandon the tested party. Bakit? Hindi mo yun magagamit kasi wala kang information. No? Kaya transfer pricing relies solely on the information, no? The data. Kaya mandatory na ngayon sa OECD transfer pricing guidelines na 2017, yung 3/3 nila na documentation requirements, which are the country-by-country reporting, the master file, and the local file. No? So mandatory na yun. Talagang yung mga multinationals are observing that already, complying to that. Okay. So number 3, application of the arm's length principle or the ALP, no? Arm's length principle. Applying the ALP is conducted after choosing the most appropriate TPM and should consider the following. Letter A, performing comparability analysis. Siyempre, sabi ko nga sa inyo, the heart of transfer pricing is comparability. Why? Kasi sabi natin sa arm's length principle, di ba, the transactions between related party must be similar to that of the independent party. So how can you prove that they are similar? By comparing. No? So sabi natin, heart of transfer pricing po ang comparability. No? So audit on transfer pricing is made by comparing condition of related transactions and condition of independent transaction. No? So related transaction is deemed comparable with independent transaction in the event that, so kailan sila comparable. Letter A, or number 1, difference, if any, between condition of affiliated transactions and condition of independent transaction has no material influence to prices or profits. So, ibig sabihin, same sila or similar. No? Kung may differences man, pero wala siyang influence on the price or profits. No? Number 2, accurate, reliable adjustment can be conducted to eliminate material influence. Kung halimbawa ng material, pwede mo siyang i-adjust. No? Halimbawa, may difference in assets. So, anong gagawin mo para matanggal mo yung assets? Magkaroon ka ngayon ng adjustment, no? Sa cost of the assets. No? Letter B, increasing scope of comparability. To compare, no, condition and related transactions to condition of independent transactions, economically relevant characteristics of conditions. Ito na yung economic conditions. Ha? Compared must be comparable adequately so that the comparison is more accurate. No? So in the event that condition of related transaction is not comparable with condition of independent transaction, Expansion of scope of comparability can be conducted by ways, among other things. Among other things, no? Following the data searching through the searching strategy. One or more data of company to be made as comparable will be obtained. However, data obtained from commercial database only constitute candidate comparable. No? So, pwedeng binibili po yung data from the commercial databases. No? May nag-offer sa akin na commercial database, baba na singil nila sa isang transfer pricing study is 100,000. You obtain information from them. No? The candidate comparable chosen must undergo manual selection process. No? Manual selection process. Isa-isahin mo talaga, mag-analyze ka. Manual review, manual screening that can be decided whether the candidate comparable is used, reliable, or rejected. Ngayon, pag namili ka na, halimbawa kami, we start with mga 200 na comparables, and then, isa-isahin mo yan, and then, i-reject mo yung iba. No? So, may criteria ka dapat kung ano yung mga i-reject mo. So, criteria of manual search and selection. To generate reliable comparable, data searching in commercial database must use right searching strategy, searching criteria, among other things. No? Code of industry in accordance with the audited taxpayer. Kasi saan mo makikita yung code of industry? Doon po sa COR or the certificate of registration, may mga code po doon ang line of activity ng taxpayer. No? And then region. Why region? Kasi dapat pareho sila ng region. Halimbawa, Asia Pacific. Why? Kasi pareho yung economic condition. And sabi na nga natin, one of the comparability factor is the economic condition. So, bakit tinitingnan yung region? Kasi yung region na sinasabi natin, pareho na economic conditions. Availability of data. No? Kasi sabi natin, pagka very unique yung industry, wala kang makuha na comparable. So, wala kang din data na makukuha kung hindi ka bibigyan ng taxpayer. No? Indicator of financial statement. Tayo na yung gagawa nun. No? Kung ano yung mga data, mga ratios na nandyan sa financial statements. No? Manual selection is made by learning profile of every company, becoming candidate comparable. No? Seeing in its website. Talagang masipag ako magtingin ng mga websites po ng mga company. No? Saka nakakalula. Minsan, ganito pala siya. No? Akala mo maliit lang na company, pero pag tiningnan mo, yung assets, billion-billion pala. No? Searching information relating to the candidate comparable in printed media or online or other methods. No? So, dapat pagka may mga search ka na, dapat meron kang media din na gagawin. Kasi isi-save mo yon, no? Either yung soft copy niya or magpapaprint ka. Minsan, yung umpisa pa lang namin, print kami lahat. Sobrang dami ng piniprint. Yung bayad nung client napunta na sa printing kasi sobrang dami ng pinapaprint. And then after, dami mong tambak kasi hindi na naman siya magamit. No? So, ano nang dapat? Soft copy na lang. No? And then, piliin mo na, maghanap ka na doon ng mga information, i-manual, isa-isahin mo, pero soft copy na yung gagamitin mo. No? The criteria to reject candidate comparable, among other things, are as follows. Number 1, general review. No? Kasi, i-reject mo na siya eh. So, ano reason mo? No? I-review mo muna. The purpose of the general review is to select companies that have data or information available to further testing and those that meet basic comparability requirements such as independence, product and business activity similarities. No? So, summary. Ito yung summary niya. No? Ito po, ang pinag-usapan natin ngayon, ito ay Revenue Audit Memorandum Order 1-2019. No? So, ito po yung sinasabi niya. Rejection criteria, description, number of companies remaining after applying the criterion. No? So, rejection criteria, active, hindi yung stagnant na hindi na nag-ooperate. No? Excuse me. Reject companies that are no longer active or are dormant since they do not have economic activity. No? So, yung mga non-operating, hindi nag-ooperate, huwag nyo isama kasi ano i-compare mo, wala siyang economic activities. Corporate structure, reject companies that are not listed as a stock corporation. The company's legal form is either a limited or general partnership. No, so dapat pareho sila. Kung listed siya sa na stock corporation, dapat yung comparable mo listed din, no? Dapat pareho sila ng legal form. Available information, reject companies that do not have financial information for at least 2 of the 3 years of the tested period, no? Reject companies that do not have sufficient information based on internet research, no? So yung walang financial information for at least 2 or 3 years, no? So i-reject mo din 'yon. Product and business activity, review the main business activity of the companies and the product that they deal with. Kasi comparables ang hinahanap mo dito eh. So anong hahanapin mo? Dapat pareho ng product, pareho ng business activity doon sa tested party mo. So, independence. Reject companies that have the following. Letter A, companies which are owned by another by more than 25% of its total shareholding. Bakit? Kasi related party yun. Hindi yun independent party. Ano ba yung kino-compare natin dito? Ang related party at ang independent party. So pag ang company is owned by another 25% daw or more, ibig sabihin, hindi yan independent party kasi that is also being controlled by a certain corporation. So letter B, companies which have related party transactions that are more than 20% of the relevant threshold, no? So may transaction siya more than 20% of the relevant threshold. Ano itong threshold? Depende ito sa requirement ng isang domestic na legislation on transfer pricing, no? Consecutive losses. Palaging loss siya. Reject companies that are not comparable due to the volatility of their profitability as evidenced or shown by consecutive years of losses incurred. Pero alam mo, sabi ng OECD, no, during our training with the OECD, do not outright reject the comparable evidence loss. Tingnan mo rin kung ano yung dahilan bakit loss siya, no? Kasi it might be na nag-charge lang siya ng pangkarami-raming mga expenses pero yung totoo hindi naman talaga siya loss, no? Other rejection reason. Reject companies that declared affidavit of non-operation and discontinued commercial operations, newly registered companies, companies that have no business description or have insufficient data. Bakit mo i-reject? Kasi remember, ang hinahanap mo dito is comparable. So how can you compare with companies na wala kang data? So you have nothing to compare. Huh? Okay. Meron?
Meron, ma'am.
Okay.
Ito, ma'am, galing po kay Sir Josefino Relien.
Okay.
Meron daw po ba VAT sa ibang bansa?
Yes po, iba-ibang rate lang. May 7%, may 12%, may 15%, iba-ibang rates. Pero majority po ng countries in the world has a value-added tax system of taxation. Inadapt po nila yung value-added tax.
Tapos, ma'am, galing po ulit kay Ma'am Mary Grace. Pag nag-accrue po ng expenses, example, rent expense, pwede na po ba mag-record ng withholding tax and input VAT as prepaid asset account, or better, wait na lang recognize the tax part pag payment na?
Remember po na ang tinatanggap natin when it comes to taxation, accrual method of accounting. So once you accrue na, nag-accrue na rin yung payment mo ng tax. O kagaya ng halimbawa sa withholding, nag-accrue na, so dapat i-remit mo na yung tax, no? Si accrual po ang accounting method used in taxation, never po na cash. So once in-accrue mo na, nandyan na, babayaran mo na yung tax. Halimbawa, yung sale mo is accounts receivable, pero nag-issue ka na ng resibo, declare mo na yun as sales, kasama na po yan doon sa VAT returns nyo. So financial review, the financial information of the remaining companies is placed under further scrutiny to ensure that the companies perform the same FAR. Ano yung FAR? Functions, assets, and risk, no? So the table below summarizes the steps. Okay. Okay. Rejection criteria, description, number of companies remaining after applying the criterion, no? Level of revenue, ito yung level of revenue, ito yung sales, no? Sales. Reject companies whose revenue level exceeds 10 times higher or lower than the tested revenue level, no? So indicating the company's scale of operations may be different from the tested party. So syempre yung hahanapin mo yung same level of revenue doon sa tested party mo, no? Kasi pag sobrang laki yung comparables mo, it might be na kailangan mo mag-adjust, no? Level of research and development expenses. Sa ibang bansa po, very important sa kanila yung research and development expenses. Although dito sa Pilipinas, hindi masyado, no? Kasi wala lang tayong research, walang development, kaya suntok sa buwan yung mga improvement ng products natin. But in other countries, mandatory po talaga sa kanila. Pag hindi sila nag-research, then parang kawawa yung product nila, no? Hindi nag-i-improve. Reject companies whose ratio of research and development expenses to sales exceed 3%. Imagine that. Bakit? Kasi kung exceed na yan ng 3%, yung research and development na sobrang laki, ang posible na treatment mo doon, capital na yon, capital expenditure. So, hindi mo na siya pwedeng i-claim na expenses. Why? Kasi it might be na nagde-develop yan ng bagong intangibles, kaya ang laki ng gastos. No? So those are things that you are going to consider. Level of intangible assets to total assets. Reject companies whose ratio of intangible assets to total assets exceed 3%. No? So intangible assets to total assets exceed 3%. Ibig sabihin malaki yung intangible assets. Kasi mag-exceed na ng 3%. Okay. Pero hindi ko alam kung ano yung reason bakit mo i-reject yung company kung marami talaga siyang intangible, no? Assets, no? Anyway, sa ibang bansa, they encourage ng recognition ng intangibles at dapat nakalagay ito sa balance sheet. Although sa atin, hindi na-recognize yung intangibles, wala sa balance sheet, no? So, number 2, use of multiple year data, no? Sa atin kasi dito sa Pilipinas, usually ang audit dito period is 1 year, no? So sa NID lang yan, yung National Investigation Division na nag-examine ng mga fraud na more than 1 year. Pero ang standard po talaga is 1 year. Kaya ako pagka nag-advise ako sa client, ang paggawa ng transfer pricing analysis or report is also on a yearly basis para hindi na mag-overlap doon sa ibang year, no? So use of multiple year data to obtain a complete understanding of the facts and circumstances surrounding a control transaction. It is useful to examine from both the years after the year under examination and prior year. Also before and after. Kasi maintindihan mo kung tumaas ba siya, nag-decrease ba siya. So may comparability ka, mako-compare mo. No? So the use of data from past years will show whether a taxpayer's reported loss on a transaction is part of a history of losses on similar transactions. No? A result of particular economic condition in a prior year that caused an increase in cost in the subsequent year, or a reflection of the fact that a product is at the end of its life cycle. No? So patapos na pala yung life cycle ng product. No? Okay. Use of an interquartile range, no? Interquartile range na statistics na po ito. In some case, it will be possible to apply the arm's length principle to arrive at a single figure, no? Price or margin. That is the most reliable to establish whether the conditions of transactions are at arm's length, no? However, because transfer pricing is not an exact science, there will be many occasions when the application of the most appropriate method or methods produces a range of figures, all of which are relatively equally reliable. Kaya may range, no? may interquartile range na tinatawag. Kaya pagdating po sa paggawa ng transfer pricing analysis, dapat meron po tayong statistician. Why? Ano po yung participation dito ng statisticians to interpret the data, no? Kaya itong mga range, mga statistical figures, ang participation po dyan, ang gagawa niyan yung statistician, no? This is often the case in practice where the comparables are extracted from a database. In such cases, if the range include a sizable number of observations, the statistical tools that take account of central tendency to narrow the range, no, the interquartile range or other percentiles, might help to enhance the reliability of the analysis, no? Kasi yung mga data na gagamitin, sobrang dami, so i-narrow down. The end result of the financial data analysis after performing functions, assets, and risks of the selected comparables are summarized in an interquartile range, no? Then the median is the midpoint of the interquartile range. The median will generally produce a different result to the average of the range being considered. So magkakaiba yan pag in-applyan mo ng iba-ibang ratio o iba-ibang formula, no? So iba yung average, iba yung meron pa yan yung distribution, no? In these cases, differences in the figure that comprise the range may be caused by the fact that in general, the application of the arm's length principle only produces an approximation of condition that would have been established between independent enterprises, no? Ito yung mga complex na talaga na cases, no? May approximation of conditions. Actually, sa advanced pricing arrangement nga, meron tayong mga tinatawag na critical assumptions, no? So, it is also possible that the different points in a range represent the fact that independent enterprises engaged in comparable transactions under comparable circumstances may not establish exactly the same price for the transaction, no? So, iba-iba ang findings kasi pag gumagawa ka ng transfer pricing analysis, una-una, depende sa issue, depende sa nature, no? Marami. Depende sa availability ng comparables, no? So, magkakaiba yung mga information na nandun. So, iba rin yung mukha ng study mo, iba din yung mga ratios na lalabas, no? It may also be the case that while every effort has been made to exclude points that have a lesser degree of comparability, what is arrived at is a range of figures for which it is considered, no? Given the process used for selecting comparables and limitations in information available on comparables, that some comparability defects remain that cannot be identified and or quantified and are therefore not adjusted. Actually, wala naman talagang perfect na study, no? Kasi pag sinabi mo na perfect, na-adjust mo up to the last point or to zero. Pero sabi dito, may comparability defects that remain, that cannot be identified and or quantified. So, hindi mo ma-identify, so hindi mo rin ma-quantify, no? So, therefore, not adjusted. Therefore, hindi mo ma-adjust. Pag hindi mo kasi ma-adjust, ibig sabihin lang, hindi mo na ma-determine, hindi mo masabi na may kulang pa pala sa nang binayaran na taxes. May question?
Meron na.
Sige.
So, ma'am, question galing po kay username linkside1209.
Okay, shout out po kayo, yung dulo na lang, kayo
1209.
1209. Okay, shout out.
Ang tanong niya, ma'am, regarding sa final withholding tax.
Okay.
Yung company daw po nila na PESA registered,
Okay.
may payment sa rental fee sa machine, non-resident corporation.
Okay.
Ano pong rate ang gagamitin namin? 30% or 7.5?
Tingnan nyo kung may tax treaty tayo with that country, no? Para magamit niya yung preferential tax rate. So, ano yung babayaran niya? Rental?
May payment daw pong rental fee machine sa non-resident corporation.
Sa rental, magwi-withhold ka dyan ng 12% na VAT. Ha? Kasi 12% na VAT. Kasi yung income, wala kang withholding sa income, only the 12% VAT. Why? Kasi sa international consensus natin, VAT has to be paid at the place of consumption. So, saan yung consumption dyan? Kasi rental yan, considered services. Nandito yan sa Pilipinas. So, i-withhold mo yung 12% na VAT kasi dito yan babayaran. But as to income, yung income kasi, babayaran yan doon sa place ng recipient. So, kung income niya yan, dahil doon siya sa ibang bansa, doon niya ipa-file ang bayaran. Ang tanong mo is withholding. Since dito yan na-earn sa Pilipinas and then expense nyo, dapat mag-withhold kayo. So, hindi ko masabi kung magkano yung rate mo when it comes to withholding, no? Kasi, rental income, magkano yung 5% sa atin, no? 5%. Kaso lang, ano yan? Foreign. So, titingnan mo, kasi gross yan, mas malaki, not engaged in trade or business, i-classify mo muna kung anong klase siya na taxpayer, and then titingnan mo yung tax treaty natin, no? So, doon mo ma-determine kung magkano ang i-withhold mo na income tax. No?
Ma'am, ano daw po sila? PESA registered.
Wala namang, sa withholding kasi, PESA registered enterprise sila, preferential rate lang naman sila, pero pagdating sa withholding, wala namang silang preferential rate kasi expense nila yun. No?
Tapos may kaduktong, ano pong inclusion ng machines at equipment ang sinasabi deducted siguro to ma'am sa 7.5% na final withholding tax, pang aircraft lang po ba related?
Tingnan mo doon, Hari. Tingnan mo doon yung sa bagong under the train law, kunin mo doon yung payment ng royalties, payment na yung bagong rates ng withholding, 13-2018. Tingnan mo, 8-2018 at saka 13. 13 is VAT. Basta dyan lang sila. Puro yan, no? I-print mo. No? Balikan natin yung question niya mamaya. Ha? Kasi hindi ko ma-picture out. No? Tingnan muna po natin yung guidelines bago kita sagutin ulit. No? Kasi ayoko yung hindi ako sigurado sa sagot ko. No? Tingnan muna natin. Okay?
Okay, ma'am. Yun pa lang po.
Sige. So tuloy tayo sa ating transfer pricing study po ito. No? Hintay lang po sandali, Mr. 1209.
1209. Username lang.
Username. No? Sige, sandali lang po kasi sagutin natin yan. No? So, if the relevant conditions of the controlled transactions, balik po muna tayo sa transfer pricing, no? Before we go back to your question. So, if the relevant conditions of the controlled transactions, price or margin, fall outside the arm's length range asserted by the BAR, no? Ano tong range na sinasabi? Halimbawa, yung gross profit margin na acceptable is 25%. Tapos yung tested party is 40%, 90%, no? O 80%. So, masyadong malayo or napakaliit, no? So, the taxpayer should have the opportunity to present arguments, no? That the conditions of the controlled transaction satisfy the arm's length principle and that the result falls within the arm's length range, that the arm's length range is different from the one asserted by the BIR. So, kung mapapansin ninyo, yung BIR gumawa na ito ng benchmark noon na ito dapat yung gross profit rate, average ng bawat line of activity, halimbawa, or industry, yung hardware, restaurant, no? Gumawa na yung BIR noon. So, para sa akin, that can be a good start, no? Or basis kung anumang klase ng industry meron kayo. Para at least kahit konti, may guide tayo. Kasi kung sobrang laki, sobrang baba naman nung ratio ng company nyo, then you have to think otherwise. Kasi baka mamaya meron na kayong mali na costing, no? O kaya may mga expenses na kayo na hindi dapat isama sa expenses nyo o kaya may kulang, no? So it's a good basis. It's a good comparison to that na ginawa po ng BAR. Meron pa?
Wala. Ang may pahabol siya, ma'am, ang tinitingnan daw po kasi nila yung RR2-98 or yung pang general na 30% po.
Yung RR2-98 po kasi, yun yung mother na regulations ng withholding. Marami na po ang nagbago dyan, no? Kasi kaya titingnan natin yung latest, especially yung under the train law, no? So, pakisabi mo po yung tinitingnan nyo sa 2-98, anong section doon? Kasi titingnan natin kung meron ng bago. Okay. Sige. Wait natin siya. Okay. So, if the taxpayer is unable to establish this fact, the BAR must determine the point within the arm's length range to which it will adjust the conditions of the controlled transactions, no? So, i-adjust niya yung condition ng controlled transaction. Actually, yung trabaho dito ng examiner, transfer pricing analyst na yung examiner dito, no? Hindi lang basta-basta examiner ang gagawa dito, no? At saka, ang kagandahan sa mga nangyayari na sa ibang bansa, when it comes to transfer pricing analysis at transfer pricing study, yung mga hindi na kayang i-conclude ng examiner, pwede silang mag-hire ng industry expert, no? To explain kung ano talaga yung nangyayari sa industry at papaano nangyayari yung mga ganyang sitwasyon, no? Let the industry expert explain. Okay? So, we have number 4, comparability adjustment, no? Kasi meron na tayo lahat, may comparables na tayo, meron na tayong comparability analysis. So, na-pinpoint na natin kung saan yung hindi sila magkatugma, hindi sila similar. So, gagawa tayo ngayon ng adjustment, no? So, comparability adjustment, measures on comparability adjustments are taken if there is difference of conditions that influence conditions, prices or profits materially between related transactions and independent transactions. There is a material difference. So, anong gagawin mo? Para meron kang comparability, mag-adjust ka, no? Sa example ko dun sa book ko, sa basic transfer pricing, ano yung example ko dun sa comparable and controlled price, no? Yung 750 ang benta ng isa, yung isa, halimbawa, 500 lang. And then, na-pinpoint mo na ang difference pala doon is yung advertising, yung additional ng packaging, no? That cost 200, no? Halimbawa lang, example lang, 200 pesos. So, yun yung adjustment mo. So, 500 plus the adjustment na 200, 700. So, may 50 ka pa talaga na hindi mo ma-account, no? So, yun yung gagawan mo na ngayon ng deficiency, no? Kasi the true price is only 700. So, yung 50, multiply mo yun sa number of units sold during the year, yun ang magiging deficiency income ng taxpayer. And remember, sa transfer pricing po, hindi niya pakikialaman yung value-added tax. Pag may findings ang transfer pricing, that affects only income tax, no? Hindi siya kasama na i-assess yung value-added tax, only income tax. So, comparability adjustment can be in the form of adjustment of difference of contractual terms, no? Kaya sabi ko sa inyo sa kontrata, if there are provisions doon na hindi arm's length, halimbawa, ano yung provision na hindi arm's length, yung rate of royalty. Halimbawa, sa independent party, 15% yung royalty. Doon sa provision, 7.5% lang. So, 7.5% yung kulang. No? So, doon ang point of adjustment mo. So, if reasonably accurate adjustment cannot be done, then test of arm's length principle at related transactions should be conducted by using another transfer pricing method that is most appropriate with facts and conditions, no? Sabi ng OECD, facts and circumstances of the case, no? So, where the revenue officer has found that a price in a controlled transaction is not at arm's length, he may make an adjustment to reflect the arm's length price or interest rate for that transaction by substituting or imputing the price or interest as the case may be. Alam nyo, dito sa word na imputing, dito na natalo yung BAR noon sa ano eh. Para sa akin, hindi to dapat na ang word imputing. Do not impute. Why? Because you cannot base the tax on imputing the price, no? Dapat hindi ito ginamit ng word dito. Kasi dito natalo yung case noon sa Phil-Invest, no? Na imputed interest, no? Binasura yun ng korte, hindi nanalo kasi imputed interest. Dapat hindi yan imputed interest, no? You're imputing the price. Okay. In such instances, the adjustment will also be reflected by a corresponding adjustment upon request of the other party of the controlled transactions. Adjustments will be made where, number 1, for the supply of property, goods, or services, the consideration is less than the consideration that would have been received or receivable in an arm's length arrangement. No? Ano yung sinasabi na arm's length arrangement? Ito yung arm's length na condition or contracts. No? Arrange na sila, may kontrata na sila. No? Dapat arm's length. Number 2, for the acquisition of property, goods, or services, the consideration is more than the consideration that would have been given or agreed to be given in an arm's length arrangement. No? Yung sobra-sobra, kasi related party. Or, ito naman ang isa pa, no consideration has been charged to the related associated party for the supply or services. No? Ito ang matindi. Bakit? Walang consideration. Meron bang ganyan sa totoong buhay na wala kang charge? No? Ano yun? Libre. So, hindi ka na in business. You are into non-stock, non-profit na organization. No? Charity ka. Eh, kung ang classification mo business, ay hindi pwede yun. Bakit? No consideration has been charged. So, how will you survive? Saan mo kukunin ngayon yung mga gastos mo dun sa pag-render mo ng services or pag-supply mo ng goods, no? So, ibig sabihin, walang economic substance yung ganyang klaseng condition or transactions. At sa transfer pricing, pagka walang economic substance, yung transactions, no, that can be disallowed, no? As if wala yan, or reclassify the transactions. Okay? May question pa? Wala pa si ano? Okay. Go lang po tayo ha. So, number 5 is losses. Companies incur losses for variety of economic and business reasons. Pero itong losses, no? Ito yung pinaka madali lang na i-test eh, no? Halimbawa, ano ba yung nature ng industry mo, no? And then your industry is gaining. Maganda yung takbo ng industry. Halimbawa, construction. Ang dami-dami nagpapakonstruct. Hindi naman tumaas yung construction materials. So, why are you losing? No? Others are gaining. Bakit ikaw lost? No? So, may question mark. Okay.
Ma'am, sumagot na siya, ma'am. Yung section na tinignan niya, ma'am, yung sa RR 2-98, section 1, siguro, ma'am, paragraph 4.
Okay.
7.5% gross rental. Lessor of aircraft, machines, and equipment. Confused po ako doon sa machines and equipment. Tapos may continuation ng ito po by general or specific related lang sa aircraft.
Oh, hindi. General po siya. So, tingnan natin.
Ang tingnan ko kasi yung 11-2018, yung sa recording na trade. Wala po dun yung rate na tungkol sa machine na.
So, sa 2-98 lang siya. Okay.
Wala po siya dun sa 11.
Kasi ang karamihan kasi sa rental, 5% sa mga domestic natin eh. No? So, doon sa 7.5%. So, yan ang wordings ng 2-98 aircraft and machineries and equipment. So,
Na-confuse lang daw siya, ma'am.
oo. General po yan. Hindi siya na related lang doon sa isang item. General po yan. So, yan ang rate, 7.5% kasi wala naman siyang bagong rate doon sa under the train law. So yan pa rin ang masusunod. Kasi sa totoo naman, marami pang provisions yung 2-98 na still existing, no? Hindi siya na amend, no? So sa income, doon sa income po yung 7.5%. Pero yung sabi ko sa iyo na yung isa na VAT, kasi rental yan, subject to VAT din, 12% yung rate, no? Final tax. Okay. So tama po yung 7.5% na ginagamit ninyo na rate, no? Sa machineries. Kasi hindi siya na-amend doon sa bago.
Yun lang ang pahapon niya.
Okay? So, nasa losses na tayo. The fact that related associated company suffer losses may be an indication that it is not being compensated fairly. So, tama. Kasi marami na mga subsidiaries dito sa Pilipinas na forever losing. Bakit? Kasi hindi naman talaga sila binabayaran, cost plus lang, no? Reimbursement of expenses. Kasi wala naman daw silang income dito. Why? Kasi yung income nandun sa parent company. So forever losing sila. Why? Because they are not compensated fairly, no? At saka mali yung ginagamit na transfer pricing method sa kanila. Dapat profit split. Ano yung profit split? Since the the business activity is highly integrated, dapat sharing ng profit, hindi yung reimbursement of expenses lang. Kasi sa reimbursement of expenses, forever talaga wala kang kikitain. Why? Kasi ni-reimburse nga lang yung expenses mo. No? So, in determining whether the losses are acceptable, it is important to ensure that the control transaction entered into is commercially realistic and make economic sense. Ito yung sinasabi ko sa inyo na may economic substance, no? Kaya maganda yung transfer pricing kasi economic taxation siya. So, tinitingnan yung economic activities na mayroon siyang economic substance, no? A taxpayer needs to establish that the losses are commercial in nature within the context of its characterization. So, pag sinabit natin kasi na commercial, meaning business, no? Hindi ka, charity, no? Bakit charity? Kasi forever losing ka. Bibigay ka lang ng serbisyo sa parent company mo. So, pagka sabi mong commercial in nature, commercial yung ginagawa mo, you want to earn profit. So in this regard, a taxpayer is expected to maintain contemporaneous documentation. Ano ibig sabihin ng contemporaneous documentation? Existing at the time of the transaction. Hindi yung ginawa mo lang dahil kailangan na. No? Which outlines the non-transfer pricing factors that have contributed to the losses. No? Okay. So, tapusin na lang natin itong dalawang slides, no? A contractor told manufacturer that only carries out production as ordered by a related party without performing functions such as operational strategy setting, product research and development, and sales is expected to maintain a consistent level of profitability. Why? Kasi dictated lang yung activity niya. Should the manufacturer suffer from losses, it must prove that these losses are not a result of its transactions with related party. Oh? Okay. So, itong separate and combined transactions approach, next time na naman po natin to i-tackle sa inyo, no? So, meron pang question? Okay. So, shout out po tayo sa lahat po ng YouTubers natin, kay Miss Marie Grace, kay shortcut na lang.
Okay, 1209.
1209, no? Saka kay Sir Lien, no? Very masipag. Si Sir Jonathan Nolasco, no? Shout out po sa inyo. And hopefully, nakapagbigay naman po kami sa inyo ng information, no? Added information. So, with that, I would like to say thank you and let's call it a night, no? Thank you very much.